Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
The rise in futures comes after a deal was reached over the weekend to avert a government shutdown. Bloomberg Markets reporter Valerie Teitel says we're also continuing to see moves in the Treasury market.
The sell-off in the Treasury market is continuing kind of perversely. If we did get a government shutdown, it would cause maybe a bid into bonds and end this Treasury sell-off for now, but it's looking like we're not getting that. And remember, last week, this rise in Treasury yields was the really big driver of why equities traded so weak. So perhaps this bounce in equity markets could be a bit short-lived if the market does glance over to what's going on in the Treasury market.
Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel says the next big event for both the Treasury and stock markets will be Friday's jobs report.
Well, Nathan, the stopgap spending bill keeps the government open through November 17th, but it does not include $6 billion in aid to Ukraine that President Biden had been pushing for. Now the president is urging House Speaker Kevin McCarthy to act quickly on that funding.
I fully expect the Speaker to keep his commitment to secure the passage and support needed to help Ukraine as they defend themselves against aggression and brutality.
President Biden says he can assure Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that the aid will get done. But McCarthy says he won't do it without new security proposals at the U.S.-Mexico border.
The priority for me is America and our borders. Now, I support being able to make sure Ukraine has the weapons that they need, but I firmly support the border first.
And Speaker McCarthy made those comments on CBS's Face the Nation, which you can hear every Sunday on Bloomberg Radio.
Well, Karen, as McCarthy struck that bipartisan deal to avert a government shutdown, the question going forward will be, will he remain as House Speaker? McCarthy angered many on the far right, including Florida Republican Matt Gaetz.
If at this time next week, Kevin McCarthy is still Speaker of the House, it will be because the Democrats bailed him out, and he can be their Speaker, not mine.
Florida's Matt Gaetz told ABC's This Week, which can be heard Sundays on Bloomberg Radio, that he'll file a motion to vacate the chair this week. McCarthy shot back at Gaetz.
He's more interested in securing TV interviews than doing something. He wanted to push us into a shutdown, even threatening his own district with all the military people there who would not be paid, only because he wants to take this motion. So be it. Bring it on. Let's get over with it, and let's start governing.
Speaker McCarthy needs only a simple majority of House members to stop the effort to remove him. Republicans hold a slim majority. Just 5 could join unified Democrats to bounce McCarthy from the Speaker's office.
Well, Nathan, in other political news this morning, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says he would not accept any offer to be Donald Trump's 2024 running mate.
No, I'm running for president. We need somebody that can serve 2 terms. We need somebody that can win states like Georgia and Arizona, which President Trump cannot do or did not do, even though candidates like McCain and Romney had no problem winning those states.
Governor DeSantis made the comments on Fox News after Trump told striking auto workers in Detroit that he's competing against job candidates in the GOP field and did not see a potential vice president in any of them.
And staying with politics, Karen, California Governor Gavin Newsom will appoint Emily's List President LaFonza Butler to fill the remainder of the late Senator Dianne Feinstein's term. Butler will be the only black woman in the current Senate and just the 3rd in history. Feinstein died last week at age 90 following months of poor health.
Well, we turn to the economy now, Nathan. While many on Wall Street expect a soft landing, Bloomberg Economics sees a recession more likely. Our economists see many risks ahead, from strikes to higher rates and oil prices.
Now, despite the recent oil surge, Karen, Citigroup predicts Brent crude will collapse to the low 70s per barrel next year. Strategist Ed Morse says the global market will swing back to a surplus. Checking Brent right now, it's higher by 0.4% at $92.61 per barrel.
Well, in corporate news, Nathan, X may mark the spot for investor Bill Ackman. The Wall Street Journal is reporting the billionaire investor is interested in pursuing a deal with Elon Musk's X Corporation as part of a new investment vehicle. Ackman's investment fund Pershing Square has regulatory approval for a new vehicle to target private companies seeking to raise $1.5 billion or more. He told the Journal that X is absolutely one of the options he's considering.
And sticking with the tech space, Karen, the head of Microsoft will testify later today in Google's antitrust trial. More on that from Bloomberg's Doug Krisner.
The DOJ has accused Google of paying $10 billion a year to rivals, as well as smartphone manufacturers and wireless carriers, to make Google Search the default option. Prosecutors hope to use the testimony of Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella to show how his company couldn't unlock Google's hold on the search market. Last week, a Microsoft executive said the company failed to secure a deal to put its Bing search app on Apple's products, even though Microsoft was willing to offer far better terms. Nadella was personally involved and spoke with Google CEO Sundar Pichai. Nadella will probably be asked about those conversations. In New York, I'm Doug Krisner, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Doug, thanks. And more trouble may be ahead for the commercial real estate market. Investors in Bloomberg's latest Markets Live Pulse survey predict office prices in the U.S. are due for a crash, and the commercial real estate market faces at least another 9 months of declines. About two-thirds of the more than 900 respondents surveyed by Bloomberg believe that the U.S. office market will only rebound after a severe collapse.
Time now to take a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Nathan. Former President Donald Trump confirmed on his social media post that he will be in a New York courtroom today for the start of his fraud trial. Details from Bloomberg's Dan Schwartzman.
Donald Trump is expected to attend the opening of his New York civil trial today. Trump is accused of committing fraud by inflating his net worth by billions of dollars in financial transactions. The Republican frontrunner for the 2024 presidential nomination is in jeopardy of losing control of his real estate empire after a judge authorized New York's Attorney General Letitia James to cancel certificates for companies that hold the assets. Trump's presence at the civil trial is not mandatory. The trial is just one of 6 the former president is facing, including 4 unrelated criminal cases. According to a witness list filed with the court, Trump is expected to testify in person later in the trial, along with his 2 sons. In New York, Dan Schwartzman, Bloomberg Radio.
A massive search is underway for a 9-year-old girl who went missing over the weekend while on a family camping trip in upstate New York. More than 100 searchers, including police and residents, are combing Morrow Lake State Park north of Albany after Charlotte Senna disappeared while riding her bike in the park Saturday evening. Yesterday, authorities issued an Amber Alert believing that Charlotte had been abducted. Governor Kathy Hochul told reporters the 4th grader was biking with others before it got dark.
She said she's finally go around one more time by herself. Be that big girl, do it by herself. Literally 15 minutes later, she hadn't come back yet. And that's really when the nightmare begins.
The child was last seen wearing an orange tie-dyed Pokemon shirt. Student loan repayments have resumed. About 28 million borrowers have to start repaying their federal student loan payments. This is after a more than 3-year repayment pause. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. How you? Wait, I'm sorry. You know who you are. Hi, Nathan.
Okay, Michael. Thank you so much. Now, we'll be sure to check back with you in the minutes ahead, as, of course, we do bring you the news throughout the day here on Bloomberg Radio. But now, wherever you are, you can get the latest news on demand whenever you want it. Subscribe to Bloomberg News now. Get the latest headlines at the click of a button so you can be informed on your schedule. Listen and subscribe to Bloomberg News now on the Bloomberg Business app, Bloomberg.com, plus Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update, brought to you by Tri-State Audi. Here's John Stashower.
All right, Nathan, much closer game than expected in MetLife, especially since Kansas City led 17-0 in the first quarter. You figured it'd be one of those nights for the Jets. It was not. They rallied, tied the game, but the Chiefs won 23-22 plays. Cost the Jets in the fourth quarter. A Zach Wilson fumble at midfield, and 3 minutes later, a holding penalty that nullified would have been the Jets' 3rd interception of Patrick Mahomes. Wilson was asked if he thinks the Jets would have scored.
We were going to. We needed some time, and it's not on the defense. It's on me. We had the ball with 6 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it was left, and we're at midfield, and we had a chance right there, so I need to be better.
Despite the loss, far and away the best game that Wilson has played. 2 teams are 4-0, the Eagles and 49ers. Miami's first loss was by 4 touchdowns in Buffalo. Another game at MetLife tonight. It's the Giants and Seahawks, and We'll see how the Giants do in the first half. Through 3 games, they've been outscored in the first half 63-6. Baseball regular season is over. Playoffs begin tomorrow. Before yesterday's Mets finale at Citi Field came the news that Buck Showalter will not be back as manager. Not all that surprising with the season the Mets just had, with David Stearns taking over as the new Met boss. Showalter becomes the 3rd Mets manager in a row to last only 2 seasons. Very sad news out of Boston. The death of former Red Sox pitcher Tim Wakefield. He was 57. NBA trade, Portland just got Drew Holiday from Milwaukee and the Damian Lillard deal. Now Holiday dealt to the Boston Celtics. In Rome, Europe hung on, won the Ryder Cup. The U.S. is 7th loss in a row away from home. WNBA, the Liberty beat the Sun. They'll play Las Vegas for the championship. John Stasheller, Bloomberg Sports.
From coast to coast, from New York to San Francisco, Boston to Washington, D.C., nationwide on SiriusXM, the Bloomberg Business app, and Bloomberg.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. It is a crisis averted for now. November 17th is the new deadline for Congress to come up with a long-term spending deal. But the 45-day stopgap that President Biden signed really at the last minute does not include aid to Ukraine, and the deal is threatening to cost House Speaker Kevin McCarthy his job, with Florida Republican Matt Gaetz vowing to push for his ouster. So let's look to what comes next as spending fights continue in Washington. Greg Valliere is with us now, Chief U.S. Policy Strategist at AGF Investments. Greg, before we get to the fights to come, I'd love to get your reaction to how this deal got done really at the last minute following a closed-door meeting with Speaker McCarthy and his fellow Republicans over the weekend.
Well, I think a precedent, Nathan, has been set, and that precedent is that enough Democrats will vote with McCarthy for a budget, for maybe to keep McCarthy as Speaker. It's a risky move, and some Democrats are saying, why should we do this? He favors impeaching Biden. He reneged on the deal we got on the debt ceiling. But I think that you only need a handful of votes, and I think that McCarthy got that handful on Saturday.
He reneged on the deal for spending. Conservatives like Matt Gaetz say he reneged on deals on their side as well. A big question, I have to imagine, in Washington, D.C. is how trustworthy is Speaker McCarthy at this point?
That's a valid question. And, nobody's perfect. I think you could probably say that he was a pragmatist. He did what he had to do. But you're right. I think many of his own members and most of the Democrats don't trust him. What he trusts are the votes, and he got the votes.
The trust issue, I bring it up because President Biden is now, even hours after signing the bill, coming out calling on Speaker McCarthy and Republicans to make good on Ukraine aid that was left out of this deal. Is Ukraine aid in jeopardy now?
I don't think so. I would concede, Nathan, that the signals this weekend were quite alarming to Western Europe in general and to Ukraine in particular. But I do think the votes are certainly there in the Senate, with Mitch McConnell, who did suffer an embarrassment on Saturday, coming back to getting of Ukraine aid. And I think Kevin McCarthy also will go along with it.
Are the votes there for border security? Because we did hear the speaker over the weekend on CBS saying that he wants to get border security done first. Is that something that Democrats in the House can get behind?
Yes, I think there are 2 or 3 things you've got to get done. One is border security, another, as we've discussed, is Ukraine, and the other is getting individual appropriation bills done. There are 12. The House is about there on 4. The Senate has done none. So between now and November 17th, you've got to make progress on all 3. I'm not sure there's a deal by November 17th. It may be just December 17th or January 17th. But I think after what happened this weekend, it's just a matter of when, not whether.
So when you say that there's not going to be a deal till maybe December or January, are you talking specifically about border security? Are you talking about appropriations bills? What could this look like if the can continues to get kicked further?
Eventually, there will be a deal on the total budget. Maybe it'll be the 12 appropriation bills, and you add them all up, and you've got the budget. But I do think you will get that. And if McCarthy is out, and that's something you can't totally dismiss, I don't see anyone succeeding him who would be more dynamic or more successful in getting a bill done.
Well, let's get to that question, because that is obviously getting a lot of attention now, with Congressman Gates saying that he's going to file motions to vacate as soon as this week. How do you see this playing out? Is it going to be another replay of the fight over just installing Speaker McCarthy?
It could be, and you can't overstate the level of antipathy toward Gates among both parties, especially Republicans. A vast majority of Republicans detest him and are hoping that he fails this week with McCarthy. But this could drag on for quite some time.
To your point, if there were a successful motion to vacate Speaker McCarthy, who succeeds him? Who wants this job?
That's the key point. And I think what he has going for him more than anything else is no logical successor. In a year or so ago, I would have said Steve Scalise, but he's suffering from a serious illness. But right now, no, I don't see anyone who you could say, oh, yeah, that's a logical pick. And that is a great asset for Kevin McCarthy.
Finally, Greg, I have to ask you, after this protracted fight, these weeks of wrangling over whether the government was going to stay open, who's empowered after all this? Which wing of the Congress can say that they notched a win?
There's a new player in town, a big player, and that's Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, who will call the shots and tell his members in the next few days, vote for McCarthy, don't vote for him. I think he'll have a lot of influence. But it's a valid issue that it's very weak leadership. The markets and the credit rating agencies must not be pleased with what they're seeing. But final point, I think a headwind for the overall economy has been avoided.
Really appreciate your insights this morning after the deal to get the government continued to stay open here. Thank you so much. Greg Valliere, Chief U.S. Policy Strategist at AGF Investments. And with that allusion to the market reaction, the sigh of relief, I think we can say, for investors. Let's get more on how this market is reacting. We're joined now by Lori Calvasina, head of U.S. Equity Strategy at RBC Capital Markets. We are seeing a lift to futures this morning, Lori. Is this about the government staying open, or is this about the losses that we saw in September and maybe a little bit of buying there?
Well, thanks for having me, as always. And I think it's a combination of both. September certainly lived up to its reputation as being a weak seasonal month. October trends aren't always fantastic, but, on average tend to be a little bit better. And I think also we did see finally, the market start to pay attention to the government shutdown last week. So I do think there's a bit of a sigh of relief here today. I think, we expect to see green on the screen at the end of the day. But when we step back, we have to take stock of the fact that last week, yes, there was concern, but there wasn't panic. And while we never like to see panic in the U.S. equity market, do we think sentiment got so bad that it can be a springboard to push things higher through the end of the year? I don't think we're at that place. I think we're getting close, but I don't think we quite got there last week.
Should there be concern in the market that this is going to potentially continue, this fight over spending, about 6.5 weeks from now when the November 17th deadline comes around?
Well, I'll tell you, that was my instant reaction, and I've seen some emails floating around from the trading community this morning. Also, sort of alluding to, okay, are we just going to have to do this again in a month, or are we just setting up for another showdown in 6 weeks? And I think, on the one hand, I am, feeling a little bit better that there was an adult in the room, as Speaker McCarthy said, that, managed to get things done. But there's still some really big fights yet to be fought. And remember, the government shutdown was never something that we, on its own, thought was this massive negative for the equity market. Most Americans do assume that they will eventually, come to an agreement. But there are a lot of little things that have been hitting the market, and I would put this in that category of maybe a medium-sized one. We've also got ongoing concern about the strikes. We've got concern about the student lending payments restarting. We've got a big earnings season coming up. And none of those other things that investors were worried about last week, in addition to the shutdown, have suddenly been washed away with this deal either.
Yeah, you mentioned some of those potential catalysts from the ongoing strikes to the start of another earnings season. What's the biggest risk that you see for markets as we get this fourth quarter started?
Excuse me. So I think that the biggest problem that I see in here, we've heard a lot about sort of tax loss selling over the past month. Strange things tend to happen at the end of the year, especially volatile years. And I don't really get the impression that investors feel like they're getting a whole lot of information coming from corporate America at this point in time. So I think there's a lot kind of riding on this earnings season that's coming up. I think investors, I heard frankly from some people who went through the last month of conferences and didn't feel like they heard all that much information. I don't feel like we got a ton of information about 2024 in the last reporting season. So I think investors are looking for clues on how the next year is going to unfold so they can really inform their valuation discussions. And I think for me personally, the biggest concern is we go through another reporting season and just don't get a lot of guidance from companies that's going to make investors feel enthused to buy the market in here.
We have seen some pretty gloomy investor sentiment in recent weeks. Has that gotten overdone, do you think, or could sentiment erode even further?
Well, if you go purely by the numbers, there's absolutely some room for it to erode. So we watched the AAII Net Bull Bear survey very, very closely. And we watched the 4-week average because the data points can be quite volatile from week to week. And what we saw last week was that the 4-week average gap between the bulls and the bears was basically, sort of sitting around flat. Now, that data point did deteriorate last week to about minus 13%. But if you go back to 4 weeks ago, it had been positive 13%. And when we look at, sort of where we were last October, I think we were down around like minus 25% or so. There is still a lot of room, for sentiment to get worse from where it's been, frankly. And, I look back at my conversations on the shutdown last week. Yes, there was concern, but there was never panic. Not anything, sort of close to what we had seen around kind of SVB or even the October lows of last year.
So in our last 30 seconds, where do you see the momentum going this week?
So I think in terms of this week, I do think we're going to have probably a good day today. I think people are going to be relieved that we're going to have some actual economic data to look through at the end of this week, and we can kind of get back to business. So I would expect things to be a little bit steady. I do think we're going to be in a little bit of a lull here before earnings season picks up later this month.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, Sirius XM Channel 119, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.